Just yesterday, we actually had a really impactful bit of research thrown out there onto the record for us to appreciate. There is a war right now against transgender people in the United States, but especially transgender youth. The conversation is heavily politicized. If you listen to conservatives, you'll hear that trans activist parents with blue hair are convincing their precious 3-year-old boy that actually they need to have bottom surgery right now, or Trump will win again in 2024, as though he won't anyway. And if you listen to the left on this issue, you'll get the truth. But we have here a pre-publication release from the official journal of the American Academy of Pediatrics. And I know what you're thinking, okay? Science. What does science have to do with gender, libtard? I thought gender was social and sex was biology. What happened to that? To which my answer would be, of course, that it's a sociology thing. So it's actually relevant. Seriously, look at this. Basically, interviews were done on the gender identity of trans youth 5 years after they engaged in social transition. This is a pre-publication release, which means that it's already been peer-reviewed and accepted, but this isn't the final version of the paper that's going out there. Here we go. Methods. The present study examined the rate of retransition and current gender identities of 317 initially transgender youth. 208 trans girls, 109 trans boys, average age 8.1 years at the start of study. 8. So we're talking, this is some full-on libtard business here. The average age of the initial trans identification of these kids was 8. Now, this is social transition here, okay? And I want to be clear about this. This study is only looking at social transition. Now, what does that mean? That means that if you're assigned male at birth and you're a 10-year-old boy and you go up to your mom and you're like, I don't want to wear a dress. They think I'm a girl. And then your mom has you wear a dress and you get called Elizabeth and nothing happens with the doctor or whatever. That's social transition. Social. We're not talking about medicine, hormone blockers, hormone therapy, surgery, nothing like that. We're just talking about social presentation, which means a couple of things. First of all, and most importantly, we're referring to the type of trans engagement which involves the lowest level of commitment. I could socially transition for 3 hours and then decide not to anyway. It's like there's no doctor, no gatekeeping. Anyone can do it at any time. The only thing you need is, I guess, the will to do so. I will not do it. I know you want me to, but I will not. You'll just have to trust me. You could do it for 3 hours. The reason I'm bringing this up is because, well, when we see the results that we're about to, I want you to keep in mind that we're dealing with the social transitioning of, on average, 8-year-old children. This is not a category of people who I would expect to make very reliable decisions about themselves. And yet, results. We found that an average of 5 years after their initial social transition, 7.3% of youth had retransitioned at least once. At the end of this period, most youth identified as binary transgender youth. 94%. 94% of these kids maintained their social identification as binary transgender youth. And by the way, 3.5% is non-binary, which means that 97.5% were either, at the end of the 5-year study, binary trans or non-binary. What was the sample selection process? Link study. Here you go. Wow! That is not a link shortener. Look at my Twitter. I retweeted it yesterday. A link to this. You'll be able to find it pretty easily. Like, I don't tweet that much. It's down there. Like maybe like 10 down or whatever. Sorry, the link is like a paragraph long. Anyway, the other categories here. 1.3% who retransition to another identity before returning to their binary transgender identity. That's included here. 2.5% of youth identified as cisgender. That's it. Of the 317 youth polled, 2.5% went to being cis after 5 or so years ago, socially transitioning. Later, cisgender identities were more common amongst youth whose initial social transition occurred before age year 6. The retransition often occurred before age 10. What this would suggest is that even of the incredibly small portion of youth who, after socially transitioning, went back to identifying as cisgender, the vast majority, or I should just say the majority, of those later cisgender identities were for kids whose social transition happened when they were mega babies, and they went back before they were even 10. This is incredibly meaningful. You guys know how for years now we have been hearing about how gender clinics don't do enough to gatekeep access to trans, like, puberty blockers or whatever for kids? Now we're realizing that the process of self-selection for trans youth just socially identifying is so significant, it is so reliable, that only 2.5% of youth would go back to identifying as cisgender after 5 years. And then if they wanted to get hormone blockers or hormones or whatever, they would have to talk to a pediatric psychiatrist and go through an additional level of scrutiny from medical professionals. It's almost as though, if you think about it, there isn't a gigantic epidemic of trans kids spuriously choosing to uproot their entire lives and subject themselves to a ton of social discrimination based exclusively off clout sharking they see on left Twitter. If you can believe it. Now, Too Yellow For You brings up a good point. TERFs are already claiming that social transition cements these kids into thinking that they're trans. And the problem here is that this is a non-falsifiable claim on their part. Because this is always what the conservatives are going to do. They're going to say, well, here's irrefutable evidence that the overwhelming majority of people who identify as trans maintain that identity, continue to enjoy that identity, go on to transition, and don't regret transitioning. And they'll look at that and they'll say, well, that's because they were brainwashed, you know. Obviously, when engaged with at this low level of scrutiny, you know, yeah. Hold on. Those are like 37% of the samples were on puberty blocks to start the study. However, see the bottom 3 lines of table 3. I read the whole study before stream. 317 sample not had blockers at the start of the study. Percent assigned male at birth. Mean age of first transition. Mean age of start of study. Average time since start of study. Sample used to be on gender from hormones at the end of the study. Average time study. Average time since binary transgender. Not had blockers at the start of the study. Had begun blockers. Only one of the participants who had blockers at the beginning of the study went to being cisgender. That is remarkable. The number of the percentage of continuous affirmation for people who have blockers to begin with is higher, as I suppose you would expect, than youth that didn't have blockers at the beginning of the study. And wow, sample of youth who are currently 14 plus years old, this rate of how many of them remain binary transgender goes up to 98.6%. Jesus. Yeah, if you look at those who have had gender-affirming hormones at the end of the study, not one of them went back to being cis, which makes sense because they're taking gender-affirming hormones. Sample of youth 5+ years since initial binary social transition. Yeah, 95%. These numbers are remarkably consistent. I think, now, obviously, we're dealing with a sample size of 317. The issue is, like, we're already talking about a really marginal group, you know? Yeah, the consistency of how many of them remain in a binary trans or non-binary identity before and after, I think would indicate that, you know, if anything, I think that's a good argument against the grooming narrative. The bottom 3 lines show no significant difference in current identity between the sample. Yeah, exactly, Soaked on Left. Because if it wasn't the case, if you think if you believed that these kids are just being groomed into it or whatever, you would expect there to be a really 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 big difference between those who haven't had blockers at the start of the study and those who have, or those who have or have not had gender affirming hormones by the end of the study. The reason for that being, you would expect a greater degree of commitment, leading to a significantly lower level of people detransitioning or whatever, or like desocially transitioning. But it's not happening. The study is consistent pretty much across the board. You know, there's not one subsection of this study for which the percentage of youth who remained at the end, either binary, transgender, or non-binary, is lower than 97%. That is genuinely remarkable. 97% being the lowest possible result. Can you explain the counter argument to people saying the kids were brainwashed into it? It's non-falsifiable. They can't prove it. Like, you could always say that. You could always say that, you know? Like, yeah, well, here's all this research showing that people in interracial marriages are happy. Oh, well, that's because pro-miscegenation media brainwashes them into thinking that they're serving the woke cult, so they don't mind the bad results of their racial inbreeding. Like, you could always say this, you know? This invisible effect of interpersonal social brainwashing that we haven't measured for and can't possibly disprove is the reason why dozens and dozens of studies are consistently producing the exact same results. There's no way of fighting against it because it's non-falsifiable. They might as well be talking about unicorns. They would need to provide a counter study to actually refute the point. Yep. And no counter study's been provided. Nope. Deborah So never sent me the research article where she said that there is research indicating that people transition because they're ashamed of being homosexual, so they transition to be heterosexual. I sent her a reminder in DMs, and I sent her a reminder in public, and in both cases, I got no result from her. The only thing she actually cited in that conversation was that god-awful rapid onset gender dysphoria study, the one where we're making psychological evaluations of trans children based on the perspectives of moms gathered from anti-trans websites, you know? Which again is like literally like trying to get a perception on interracial relationships by asking racist white dads, you know? Yeah, it's like laughably bad. I can't believe they got peer reviewed. Like, it's actually insane they got peer reviewed to me. Yeah. Anyway, this study is really really cool. Yeah, you know. Look, keep in mind, by the way, the only reason all this gender BS is so prominent and oft discussed at the moment is because it keeps getting brought up. It's a big matter of social discourse, you know. When all the turbulent waters get calmed, I genuinely believe that all of this is going to be some very marginal, in a good way, part of like the human social experience. You know what I mean? Like, if there's a kid and they're treated like a boy and they're like, I'm a girl, you know, whatever. Done, you know? I feel like this is so big of an issue right now, but there are so many older social categorizations that don't even matter. Like the Roman distinction between a citizen and a barbarian, right? Like, that meant a lot for a really long time, and now it doesn't, you know? Back in the foundational days of America, the only people who could vote were white landowning males, and I think there were some other categories as well. And now that combination of attributes, it was very important back then. Nowadays, in terms of civic participation, far less so, though obviously white landowning men are still probably pretty disproportionately represented in terms of electoral power. What are you going to do, you know? The point is like, it's a big deal right now. But listen, do you guys like going outside and pulling out your flashcards like, all right, here are my 18 friends and their friends, my girlfriend's friends, and here's everyone's pronouns? I don't. That's why I they them everyone, okay? It's not that I hate. I just forget. Soon we won't even sorry, going outside. I should have put a TW before that. You know, soon I'm not going to have to worry about it so much because the degree of social investment that we engage in is proportional to the counter reaction that is being, you know, that we're experiencing. I'm just saying, to those of you who are concerned that stuff like this sets a worrying precedent, like, oh, we're gonna like all of our fucking 6-year-olds are gonna be talking about their gender. Listen, it's not a big deal. It's not now, and it's gonna be even less a one once everyone's rights are sorted. Does that make sense? It's gonna be okay. It's gonna be all right. We're gonna make it, okay? Why do you think most of them are AMAB? My personal belief for the reason why there are generally in most available circumstances apparently more trans women than trans men. I think it mostly has to do with how women are afforded a wider range of acceptable behaviors in some senses. I guess to put it another way, like a cis woman can be butch, and it's like, I mean, not to say that she won't get shit for it. She will, but it's not well, a butch woman can live her life. A guy who wears a dress outside often literally cannot live his life because he'll be killed. So something tells me that the range of available expression, it kind of influences the proportion of how comfortable people are with their gender identities and expression and stuff like that. Now I know society, right? Went from tomboy to femboy. Great. Whatever makes you happy. God willing. Listen, don't get down in the dumps about this. This is a good study. In fact, to my knowledge, this is maybe literally the best study we have thus far on the viability of trans identification, self-identification in youth. And that's good. I hate Tempest. Yeah, I agree. It's very hard being me. Um, Thankfully, by tremendous coincidence, it just turns out all the ways that I like to express myself are contextually appropriate within the purview of being a guy. Uh, we got tall. I got a beard, horses, the whole 9 yards. All right, moving on.